Have you ever wondered how an entire nation manages to save nearly half of everything they earn while the rest of us struggle to put away even 5%? Well, buckle up because today I'm about to blow your mind with the financial secrets of 1.4 billion people who have turned saving money into an art form. My name is Nick, and I've spent years studying money, personal finance, and the psychology behind wealth building, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered when I started digging into Chinese saving strategies. If you're tired of living paycheck to paycheck and want to learn from a culture that has mastered the art of financial discipline, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it changes how you think about money. Here's something that's going to shock you. The average Chinese household saves $36 out of every 100 they earn. Let me repeat that because it sounds almost impossible. For every $100 that comes through the door, 36 of those dollars get saved. Meanwhile, here in America, we're celebrating if we manage to save $3.50 out of that same 100. That's not a small difference we're talking about. That's a 10-to-1 ratio that should make every one of us question everything we think we know about money. But wait, it gets even more incredible. China's gross savings rate has averaged nearly 46% since 1952. That means for over 70 years, through wars, economic upheavals, and massive social changes, Chinese families have consistently saved almost half of their income. During their peak saving years around 2008, they were putting away over 50% of everything they earned. Imagine if you could save 50 cents of every dollar you made. Your financial problems would disappear faster than free pizza at a college dorm. Now, before you start thinking this is some government propaganda or economic miracle that only works in China, let me tell you about Wang Shanai. She's a 32-year-old woman who has been saving 90% of her salary for 9 years. Yes, you heard that right. 90%. She lives on just 10% of what she earns, and the results speak for themselves. She owns 2 apartments in Nanjing, one of China's most expensive cities, and she's done it all through pure saving power, no lottery tickets or cryptocurrency gambles required. When Wang shared her story on social media, it exploded. Over 500 million people viewed her interview, and tens of thousands started debating whether they should follow her extreme approach. 500 million views for a story about saving money. That tells you everything you need to know about how seriously Chinese culture takes financial discipline. So, what's the secret? How do they do it? Is it some ancient wisdom passed down through generations, or are they just naturally better with money than the rest of us? The truth is both simpler and more profound than you might expect. At the heart of Chinese saving culture lies something that would sound completely foreign to most Western ears. It's called the 10-to-1 rule, and it's exactly as extreme as it sounds. The goal is to spend just 1 yuan for every 10 you earn. That's a 90% savings rate that makes financial advisors break out in cold sweats. Even the most disciplined Chinese workers struggle to achieve this target, but here's the brilliant part. By aiming for 90%, even if you only hit 50 or 60%, you're still saving more than most people earn. This isn't just about being cheap or depriving yourself of everything enjoyable in life. It's about fundamentally changing your relationship with money. When you grow up believing that you should live on 10% of your income, every spending decision gets filtered through a completely different lens. That expensive coffee habit that costs you $5 a day suddenly seems absurd when you realize it represents half your daily living allowance. But the 10-to-1 rule is just the tip of the iceberg. The real secret weapon in the Chinese saving arsenal is something they call zero-based budgeting, and it's so simple that it's almost embarrassing how effective it is. Here's how it works. At the beginning of every month, you take your entire income and assign every single dollar a job before you spend anything. Not a single penny goes unaccounted for. Your rent gets assigned, your groceries get assigned, your transportation costs get assigned. But here's the crucial difference. Your savings get assigned first before anything else. Most people save whatever's left over after they've paid all of their bills and bought whatever caught their eye that month. Chinese families flip this completely upside down. They pay their savings first, then figure out how to live on what remains. Let's say you earn $4,000 a month. In a zero-based budget, you might assign $1,000 to savings and investments right off the top. Then you have $3,000 left to cover rent, food, transportation, and everything else. This forces you to be creative and disciplined with your spending because the money for savings has already been spoken for. The psychological impact of this approach cannot be overstated. When you treat savings as your first and most important expense, it stops being optional. It becomes as essential as paying your rent or buying groceries. You wouldn't skip your rent payment because you saw a nice pair of shoes, so why would you skip your savings payment for the same reason? This zero-based approach also eliminates one of the biggest wealth killers in Western culture, lifestyle inflation. You know what I'm talking about. You get a raise and suddenly your expenses mysteriously increase to match your new income. You're still living paycheck to paycheck, just with nicer stuff. Chinese families avoid this trap by allocating any income increases to savings before they can get used to spending the extra money. Now, you might be wondering if this extreme approach to saving requires living like a monk and never enjoying anything. That's where another Chinese principle comes into play, the distinction between needs and wants. Chinese culture has developed an almost surgical precision when it comes to identifying what you actually need versus what marketing has convinced you that you want. Take smartphones, for example. You need a device that can make calls, send messages, and access the internet. Do you need the latest model with the titanium frame and professional camera system that costs more than some people's monthly rent? Probably not. A Chinese approach would be to buy a reliable phone that meets your actual needs and invest the difference. That extra $500 or $1,000 could be working for you instead of sitting in Apple's bank account. This doesn't mean Chinese families never spend money on things they enjoy. It means they're incredibly strategic about when and how they splurge. If they're going to spend money on something they want rather than need, it better provide exceptional long-term value. That expensive wallet better last for years. Those quality shoes better be resolable and durable. Every purchase gets evaluated not just for its immediate utility, but for its cost per use over time. The Chinese have also mastered something that Western consumer culture actively fights against: delayed gratification. While we're bombarded with messages about treating ourselves and living for today, Chinese culture celebrates the ability to wait for better opportunities. This patience allows them to avoid impulse purchases that drain savings accounts and accumulate debt. Speaking of debt, here's another fundamental difference that explains Chinese saving success. In China, debt is viewed with suspicion and avoided whenever possible. The idea of financing a car or putting a vacation on a credit card seems borderline insane to many Chinese families. If you can't afford to pay cash for something, the default assumption is that you can't afford it at all. This cash-only mentality forces families to save for purchases in advance rather than borrowing against future income. It might take longer to buy that car or take that vacation, but when you finally do, you own it outright. No monthly payments, no interest charges, no stress about making ends meet if your income drops unexpectedly. The anti-debt philosophy also eliminates one of the biggest obstacles to saving that plague Western households. When you're not making car payments, credit card payments, and personal loan payments every month, you have a lot more money available for savings. The average American household carries over $9,000 in credit card debt alone. Imagine how much you could save if that money wasn't going to interest payments every month. But here's where Chinese saving strategy gets really fascinating, and it's something that would make most financial advisors question everything they thought they knew about money management. Chinese families have turned education into their ultimate investment strategy, and the numbers behind this approach are absolutely staggering. When Chinese parents start saving for their children's education, they're not just setting aside money for college tuition. They're viewing every yuan spent on education as a guaranteed return on investment that will compound for generations. This isn't some feel-good philosophy about the value of learning. This is cold, hard financial calculation that treats education like the stock market's best performing asset. Think about it this way. If you invest $100,000 in education for your child and that education increases their lifetime earning potential by just $50,000 per year, you've created a return that would make Warren Buffett jealous. Like over a 30-year career, that's $1.5 million in additional income from a $100,000 investment. Show me a mutual fund that can deliver those kinds of returns. This educational investment strategy explains why Chinese families are willing to live on rice and vegetables while spending thousands on tutoring, language classes, and test preparation. They're not being cheap with themselves and generous with their kids. They're making calculated financial decisions based on long-term wealth building that spans generations. The one-child policy actually amplified this effect in ways that economists are still trying to understand. When you only have one child to invest in, every educational dollar becomes incredibly concentrated. Instead of spreading resources across multiple children, Chinese families could focus all their educational firepower on a single individual. It's like the difference between investing in a diversified portfolio and putting everything into one sure thing stock. But there's another demographic factor that's been driving Chinese saving behavior for decades, and it's something that would probably make dating apps crash if it happened in America. The gender imbalance created by the one-child policy resulted in roughly 22 extra men for every 100 women in some age groups. When you have more men competing for fewer women, guess what becomes the ultimate competitive advantage? Money. Young Chinese men quickly realized that having a fat savings account wasn't just about financial security. It was about survival in the dating market. This created what economists call a savings arms race, where men competed to accumulate wealth faster than their peers. Imagine if every guy in your town was trying to outsave everyone else just to get a date. The collective savings rate would go through the roof. This competition extended beyond just having money in the bank. Chinese culture developed the expectation that men should own property before getting married. Not rent an apartment, not have good credit, but actually own real estate. This requirement forced an entire generation of young men to become hyper-focused savers because homeownership became a prerequisite for starting a family. Now, before you start feeling sorry for Chinese men having to save so aggressively just to find a wife, remember that this cultural pressure created some of the most disciplined savers in human history. These guys developed financial habits in their 20s that would serve them well for the rest of their lives. They learned to delay gratification, prioritize long-term goals over short-term pleasures, and view every purchase through the lens of opportunity cost. The absence of a comprehensive social safety net also plays a huge role in Chinese saving behavior. When you know the government isn't going to take care of you in retirement, pay for your health care, or support you if you lose your job, saving money stops being optional. It becomes a matter of survival. Most Americans assume they'll receive Social Security benefits, Medicare coverage, and unemployment insurance if things go wrong. Chinese families don't have that luxury. They know that every dollar they don't save today could mean the difference between dignity and desperation in old age. This awareness creates a sense of urgency around saving that's hard to replicate in countries with stronger social programs. The healthcare factor alone is enough to motivate extreme saving behavior. Medical emergencies that might cost thousands in America could bankrupt a Chinese family without adequate savings. This reality makes that emergency fund seem less like a nice to have and more like life insurance you pay yourself. But here's where Chinese saving culture gets really interesting from a psychological perspective. They've managed to flip the entire narrative around money and happiness that dominates Western thinking. While Americans are constantly told that money can't buy happiness and that experiences matter more than savings accounts. Chinese culture celebrates financial discipline as a virtue that brings peace of mind and family security. This cultural difference shows up in how families talk about money around the dinner table. American kids often hear their parents stress about bills, complain about not having enough money, and treat financial discussions as negative experiences. Chinese children grow up hearing their parents plan purchases months in advance, celebrate reaching savings milestones, and discuss money as a tool for achieving family goals. The result is that Chinese kids develop a completely different emotional relationship with money. Instead of viewing saving as deprivation, they see it as empowerment. Instead of feeling restricted by budgets, they feel secure knowing exactly where every dollar is going. This psychological foundation saving rates makes the extreme we talked about earlier feel natural rather than torturous. First, Chinese culture has also developed sophisticated strategies for dealing with what psychologists call decision fatigue. When you're trying to save aggressively, every purchase becomes a decision point that requires willpower. Buy the expensive shampoo or the cheap one, eat out tonight or cook at home, take the taxi or walk. Rather than relying on willpower for every decision, Chinese families create systems that eliminate most of these choices. They shop at the same stores, buy the same brands, and follow the same routines week after week. This automation reduces the mental energy required to stick to their savings goals and prevents impulse purchases that could derail their progress. The concept of face, or social reputation, also works in favor of savings rather than against it. In American culture, displaying wealth through expensive cars, clothes, and gadgets often increases your social status. In Chinese culture, being known as someone who saves money and makes smart financial decisions carries more weight than showing off luxury purchases. This social dynamic means that peer pressure actually supports saving behavior rather than undermining it. When your neighbors respect you more for driving a 10-year-old car that's paid off than they would for financing a luxury vehicle, it becomes much easier to make financially responsible choices. Chinese families have also mastered the art of finding joy in simple pleasures that don't cost much money. Family dinners at home become social events. Walking in parks replaces expensive entertainment. Playing cards or board games substitutes for costly nights out. These aren't desperate measures taken by people who can't afford better options. They're conscious choices made by families who understand that happiness doesn't require constant spending. This ability to find satisfaction in low-cost activities isn't just about saving money in the moment. It's about developing a lifestyle that can be sustained even during economic downturns or unexpected financial challenges. When your happiness doesn't depend on expensive restaurants, designer clothes, or luxury vacations, you become remarkably resilient to financial stress. The compound effect of all these cultural factors creates saving rates that seem impossible to Americans but feel completely natural to Chinese families. When saving is viewed as honorable rather than restrictive, when every purchase is evaluated for long-term value, when peer pressure supports financial discipline rather than consumption, and when happiness comes from simple pleasures rather than expensive indulgences, achieving a 40 or 50% savings rate stops being a superhuman feat and starts being an inevitable outcome. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Chinese saving culture is how they've weaponized something that would make most Americans break out in hives: complete financial transparency within the family. I'm not talking about occasionally checking in on the budget. I'm talking about every family member knowing exactly how much money comes in, where every penny goes, and what the long-term financial goals are for the entire household. This level of financial openness creates something remarkable. When your teenage son knows that the family is saving for his college education and can see exactly how much progress you're making each month, he's less likely to ask for expensive sneakers. When your spouse understands that skipping restaurant meals for 2 months means you can fully fund your emergency account, the sacrifice stops feeling like deprivation and starts feeling like teamwork. American families often treat money conversations like state secrets. Parents whisper about bills when kids leave the room. Couples argue about spending behind closed doors, and nobody really knows if the family is on track financially or heading for disaster. Chinese families flip this completely around. Money becomes a family project where everyone understands their role and contribution. This transparency also eliminates one of the biggest sources of financial stress in Western households: the mystery of where money goes. You know that feeling when you check your bank account and wonder how you spent $800 last month with nothing to show for it? Chinese families never experience that confusion because every transaction gets recorded, discussed, and evaluated against family goals. The tracking system they use would make accountants weep with joy. We're not talking about rough estimates or occasional check-ins. Chinese families often know their spending down to the yuan, and they review these numbers regularly like a board of directors examining quarterly reports. This might sound obsessive to American ears, but it's actually incredibly liberating. When you know exactly where your money goes, you gain control over it. That mysterious leak in your budget gets plugged. Those unconscious spending habits get exposed and corrected. The financial anxiety that comes from uncertainty disappears because uncertainty itself gets eliminated through meticulous tracking. But here's where Chinese money management gets really clever, and it's something that would probably revolutionize American household finances if we could swallow our pride long enough to implement it. They've mastered the art of making saving money feel like winning a game rather than suffering through punishment. Implementing these Chinese saving strategies might seem overwhelming at first. Going from saving 3% to 36% doesn't happen overnight, and you don't need to start eating rice and beans every meal to make progress. The beauty of these principles is that even applying half of them will put you miles ahead of where you are now. Start with zero-based budgeting, track every dollar for 1 month, and see where your money actually goes. You'll probably discover you're spending more on random stuff than you thought. Then gradually increase your savings rate. If you're currently saving 5%, aim for 10% next month. Once that feels comfortable, push for 15%. Remember, this isn't about depriving yourself of everything fun. It's about being intentional with your money so you can have the life you actually want instead of the life your impulses create. The Chinese have figured out something that most of us are still learning. True financial freedom comes from controlling your money, not from your money controlling you. So whether you implement the 10-to-1 rule, embrace zero-based budgeting, or just start distinguishing between your needs and wants, you're taking steps toward a financial future that most people only dream about. And who knows, maybe in a few years you'll be the one saving 40% of your income while your friends wonder how you make it look so easy.